We're here at Houston Latino Film Festival, and I'm here with the director of our opening night film, Gabriella A. Why don't you tell me a little bit about your film in terms of the genesis of it?
So Boca Chica tells the story of Desi, and she's a young girl growing up in the beaches of the Dominican Republic in a community called Boca Chica. And I like to say that it's a film about the secrets that we keep in order to protect our family, our dreams, and this idea we have of our home. And it's actually a project that was the first film that was brought to me that I didn't write. But it had so many themes that overlapped with projects that I actually had in development and the work that I had been doing and the issues that were important to me, not only in the Dominican Republic, which is where my mother was born and raised, but also back home as a first-generation Dominican Guyanese American woman, and then globally realizing that there were these issues around protecting our young girls and hypersexualization. And so when Esterling Ramirez, who's the producer of the film, who runs a wonderful production company called Celine Films, had this idea and had partnered with Marite Ugas and Mariana Rodon from Venezuela and Peru to write this film, and then was looking for a Dominican American or Dominican diaspora director, I was like, had the conversation, and we really aligned in terms of the types of stories we wanted to tell and the hope that we wanted to give in terms of covering coming of age stories. So that was a large part of the genesis. It was right after the pandemic and lockdown that I received an email from Esterling, and I had at that point spent 7 years trying to make this film Leche that went through the Sundance Labs. And, you know, the indie film hustle is very real, especially telling our stories as Latinos. And that was around Santeria and a young Dominican girl with albinism and colorism within her community. And so I was trying to find the partners for that film, and then had written another film that actually also had to do with sex tourism on the island and sisters. And so I think it was largely my experience and around researching that and my passion for telling these kinds of stories around young women that aligned with Sterling and Marite and Mariana working on this project, that we were like, okay, this is a team that's going to help realize this. And then, of course, I had my incredible crew and cast that then came a part of it as well.
And I want to ask you about that, specifically the cast. You know, this is a film about Desi, the young girl in the film. You've got this story of a brother and a cousin that are, they've also got some issues and some past that they're dealing with. And I think that's reflected across all of the characters in the film. How important was it to really hit that element of people dealing with either trauma or just things that have happened that they haven't really resolved?
Yeah, the film, I feel like the film that was brought to me by Marite and Mariana, first it was pitched, it was a treatment when I got it, but it was pitched by Esterling as this hopeful film centered around this young girl whose, you know, eyes are being awakened to what is happening in her community and amongst her friends. And then she further learns about her family's secrets. And that's why I really clung on to when I was casting for this film, this idea of secrets and the secrets that each character is keeping from the people that are closest to them, but also from themselves. There's a lot of inability to confront their deepest desires, and then because of the things that they don't want to tell each other. And you see that in Carmen, the mother, and Nena, the tia. And so that was really important to me to showcase, okay, this generational in the casting. And it was very important, clearly on the page from what I read from the start. But it was, you know, it is an ensemble piece, like you said. And so when I first read it, I was like, oh, there's this large family, there's a wedding. And as a writer, I've always told much more intimate POV stories. So that was part of my okay, how do we tackle this with the nuance and delicacy that we want? And that was always to go back to Desi's perspective.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering about that. The film really does kind of build to this, it's almost a set piece of this wedding. Yeah. And you've got several different threads with all the characters leading to it. Yeah. So it's not just one character's journey to the wedding, but the mother, the aunt, even the, let's say, what the bride to be, and her element in the story. Yeah. So I'm curious, tying all those threads together, did you find it to be challenging with these elements?
Yeah, that was definitely one of the most daunting things. And I think that's why Desi was always my North Star, is first of all, to direct something that for the first time like was not something that I gave birth to as a screenwriter, and I come to filmmaking as a writer first. So like, yes, there was a treatment and there was a lot of feedback I was giving, and then at one point when Marite and Mariana stepped away, also knowing that it was my first feature and having been brought onto the project by Sterling, I was able to like add and color into the lines and be like, okay, this
Okay.
feels like the texture of Desi, introducing things like the music was so important. I was like, well, I want some sort of like set piece or something that connects her to, and I want music to be its own character and to show the diversity of music within Dominican culture and origins. And so the headphones became a part of the film, and synesthesia and all of these things. So for me, like with all of these stories, it was constantly like, okay, grounded back to Desi. How is she feeling? How is she interacting with this character that's going through something? Obviously, Fran is massive, like you mentioned, her brother. But yeah, everyone has a role in the corruption that's happening, but also in Desi finding her voice. That was really, yeah.
I think you give audiences a lot of, I guess, a wide range of characters to identify with in one way or another. Like this is a very specific thing. Like to me, the one that really stands out is the brother who's in New York. He's New York, right?
Yeah.
Where he's kind of telling people he's living a life that he's not living. And he's actually secretly kind of struggling. And to come home and to kind of confront that or own up to it in a way.
Yeah, I mean, a massive theme and issue that was presented is this idea of like, of dreams in general, but then with Fran, the American dream, or like, there's something more out there. And for both him and Elvis, like that is like, even with Elvis and his relationship, and then this trafficking business that he has going, and the idea of business and commerce in countries that are tied to tourism, like La República Dominicana, like everything is like, okay, this is one of the main sources of like how we are presented to the rest of the world. And so obviously with that comes the darker side of things that we also discuss in our film. But yeah, for me with Fran in New York, I mean, I certainly related to that storyline a lot, being, you know, the child that was born in New York and the first gen kid who is carrying a lot of dreams, or kind of feels a weight of like, okay, you made so many sacrifices, both for my like Guyanese father and my Dominican mother and my abuela, who was the first one to come here before like my mother and her siblings did. There's kind of this idea of like, okay, you've got to, like the mother Carmen says, you've got to be the best. You have to go to Carnegie Hall and like just reach the top. And so that's a storyline that I feel like was very important to a lot of people. But what I really thought was beautiful in the script, and what I wanted to showcase and highlight, is like, there's an idea of that, and sometimes, yes, that is the thing you need to do, but there's always a reason and beauty in coming back. And this idea of homecomings, and that what you left is really hard to confront sometimes, but it's sometimes necessary to get to that next place. And for me, making this film was like, okay, a homecoming spiritually and almost ancestrally. I mean, it was in my immediate family because my mother was born and raised there, but also like we wrapped the film on the 1-year death anniversary of my abuela, and to be back where like my mother and her siblings didn't return to, and as the generation after that, and to be making films amongst the community and telling stories that are nuanced, like that was so important to me. And so that was kind of when the process felt like it mimicked the story, and this idea of like, you know, Fran goes, I mean, spoiler alert, but there's an aspect of staying in the island at the end and maybe finding some success or path there, like for his music, versus sort of the lie, like you said, he's living in New York.
Right, and I think that's something that I've kind of noticed. It's not necessarily a theme, but it is kind of a recurring, I guess, a motif where a lot of films, specifically with Latin characters, because a lot of times there is if not an actual like literal like country to go back to, there's like a home to go back to, like a past to go back to. And I think that's an interesting thing with this film, is it does tackle that in different ways, even with the mother and the aunt. Like they're home, they're in their home country, but they still have things that they need to go back and resolve. And so to see that all, and then see it through the eyes of someone who doesn't quite have a past yet,
Yeah.
right? I think it's a very
But an inherited past, which is interesting that I don't think, yeah, we all have this past that we talk about. I feel like, especially in our communities, a lot the ancestors and like, okay, what sacrifices have we made and what honor are we honoring them? But yeah, it's true. She doesn't really have that history and she's being awakened to what she doesn't know about what she's carrying. Yeah.
right, right. And I know that's a thread in the film, which I appreciate the acknowledgement of. There are some really kind of darker sides to certain parts of the world, certain cultures, and to see that element in there as a threat, of course, but to see like this is not a story about that. It's an element, it's a thing to be aware of, and a character like this, or just young people, young girls specifically, can be in very extreme sort of danger of falling into this.
Yeah, there's a lot of delicacy and grace that we wanted to place within tackling these characters and these darker themes, because I think sometimes even when I will read the log like again or how it's been presented in certain places, like, yes, this issue is very important. We should have the conversation about these exploitation. That is why, the origin of why Sterling wanted to make the film, the origin of why being in these communities, my eyes were open to something that essentially everyone knows is happening but doesn't talk about very candidly, which you see more in your face in certain environments. But it's something that would, like, when I brought the film to Miami, I mean, it happens in the backyard in New York, and I know it's happening in Texas. It's like trafficking is a huge issue in this country, and as I would be a disservice as somebody who's born in the States, who's tied and telling stories about my heritage and traveling between worlds, to not like tell, like, yes, be grounded in specificity, but like acknowledge the reality that this is overarching and it's not some plague for Latin America or for the Caribbean or for Southeast Asia. So yeah, there's a lot of delicacy into that, and family sort of like grounds it in this more universal and relatable place for everyone.
There could be the temptation, let's say, to like, oh, well, this film, this story, we're going to solve that problem. I mean, it's a massive problem, and it's a problem that is not easy to even talk about, right? So this film at least deals with it in a realistic way. It's very difficult, and in some ways, family is your sanctuary, right? To hold those people tight and pay attention to them.
Yeah.
And
yeah. Your sanctuary and I guess our film's interesting because the mother, like, it's hurt people kind of happening in that situation. And with Elvis too, and that he, has a stronger connection with his aunt, their mother. So yeah, there's that duality to, like, family can be your salvation and can be your downfall, and how do you reconcile that?
Right.
Which is, like you said, I don't, as filmmakers and with my collaborators, we don't have all the, like, answers, but I want to have that discussion and open, and, like, that is why it's so beautiful being at the Houston Latino Film Festival too, is like, this is where you get to be a part of that or hear the questions that are being posed, and constantly come out of it thinking more deeply about, your question of why,
Right.
why I decided that, okay, Boca Chica is a story that I want to be a part of. So,
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, speaking of being here at the festival, so you have a screening that is happening right now. The audience will have great questions for you.
They
may have better questions than I do.
They always do. This is a good warm up for me.
Well, good. Well, it's great to have you here. It's great to talk to you and to talk about the film. And if anybody is coming to the festival, well, I'm sorry you missed it today, but I'm sure they'll be able to see it at some point.
Yeah, Boca Chica will be available hopefully to rent very soon. We're traveling to different universities with Praga Films, which has an incredible collection of Latin American cinema. I highly encourage, if you're in the university or academia space, anywhere in Latin America studies, African Caribbean studies, Spanish, to check them out. There's a ton of films from the Dominican Republic, and I can't stress enough, like seeking out the films that are coming out of our country, thanks to the cinema law and the Adhere Cine, our film commission. There's nuance of genres and beautiful, deep stories being told from a wide variety of perspectives. And we hope that the film will be, available more widely
That's great.
to audiences here.
If anybody is interested in the film, where can they maybe look up some info about
Yeah,
it?
so you can follow us on Instagram at Boca Chica Film, and you will find more about the film there and our future screenings. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, it was great to talk to you, Gabriella.
Thank you so much, Robert, and thank you, Houston Latino Film Festival.